My son Mihan graduated from BIS earlier this year, something I never dreamed he'd be able to do when he was born 17 years ago with Down syndrome. Hearing his diagnosis at birth was like a stab through our hearts, one of those life-changing moments after which you know that nothing will ever be the same. But after the initial heartbreak came a journey of discovery and new ways of viewing the world. Today, I look back with pity at that person that I was, devastated and terrified about what life would be like for us and our child. And I wish I could tell that former self what I know now, that he'd bring more joy into our lives than we could ever imagine, and that he'd surprise us and surpass expectations every step of the way. So why was I so terrified? It's because we were completely clueless about Down syndrome and disability in general. For those of you who may not be familiar with Down syndrome, it's a genetic condition that causes developmental delays and intellectual disability. And here we were for the first time staring it in the face of our beautiful baby boy. Up until the birth of our son, I don't think I'd ever had any meaningful interaction with a person with disability. Growing up, I was aware of special schools, places that kids with disabilities attended, but they inhabited a whole separate universe from the one I lived in. And I admit on the few occasions that I did meet someone with a disability, I was uncomfortable and fearful, not knowing quite what to say or how to engage. I imagine that many people of my generation will relate to this, to the idea that disabled people were essentially different from us. But having Mihan in my life has completely changed the way I view disability. It's made me stop seeing disability as binary, disabled versus non-disabled, us versus them, or something alien and separate from myself. Living with Mihan has made me see that disability is something that exists in degrees, and there are shades of it in all of us. Let me describe an anecdote from a few years ago. Mihan was around 10 years old when the Rubik's Cube made a comeback in schools. Mihan watched mesmerized as his sister and several classmates tried to solve it. When he requested that we buy him one, we did, but in my mind, I thought we were just being indulgent. Sure, he was a capable kid considering his learning difficulties, but the complex multi-step approach to solving even one side was something I was pretty sure was way beyond his ability. After all, this was a kid who could only do the most elementary math, and hell, even I couldn't solve it. So when he excitedly showed me a solved face, I'm ashamed to say I did not believe he had done it himself. I asked him several times if his sister had helped, and only believed it when I jumbled it up for him and he solved it as I watched, awestruck. In the months that followed, he was single-minded in his pursuit to solve the whole thing. I was used to helping Mihan with schoolwork, but here I was beyond my depth. His sister, school friends, dad weren't able to help beyond a point. So eventually he turned to an online tutorial and taught himself to solve it. A pretty stunning feat for a young boy with Down syndrome. I believe this story illustrates well how many people with special needs have ability levels that are mixed. Mihan isn't great at math, but clearly has excellent spatial problem-solving abilities. He struggles to button his shirt and tie his shoelaces, but those same fingers can turn that cube with great ease. He takes extra time to complete a biology or history test, but is super quick with witty comebacks. He might have a learning disability, but constantly says the wisest things, such as, "I'm not studying for marks, Mama, I'm studying for life." And we often joke about what a guru he is. So think about it. Isn't it kind of the same with the rest of us? Aren't we too good at some things but have areas that we're really terrible at and have needed additional help for? I know a few of mine. I'm terribly anxious about speaking in public. I break into a cold sweat if I have to address a group. Thankfully, this video is pre-recorded. I have a pathologically bad sense of direction. I'm not so quick with numbers. Don't we all have a disability? Isn't it just a matter of degree? When we view disability in this manner, it becomes plain to see why inclusive schools make sense. In classrooms, children vary greatly in ability, with typical kids falling along a curve. It's obvious then that catering to the outliers on this curve will benefit several others along the same continuum. So when inclusion is done effectively, the class as a whole can benefit. Additional support that's put in for kids like Mihan can be utilized by other kids. In inclusive classrooms, teachers think out of the box and use alternative modes of teaching that cater to varied learning styles and abilities, and this ends up helping several kids. All of this is borne out by research, which indicates that typical students in inclusive classrooms often end up making better academic progress in reading and math compared to those in non-inclusive classrooms. This is because inclusive schools challenge conventional one-size-fits-all teaching methods. They bring in a culture where all children are valued and efforts are made to accommodate every child. Sure, this comes with additional effort, but it yields rich dividends. Several countries have realized the benefits of inclusive education decades ago and have legislated to make it mandatory. Sadly, in India, we're far behind. Most schools, in fact, make no apologies about testing kids to admit only those who they judge to be the brightest. I hope that BIS, being the trailblazer it's always been, can lead the way in changing some of those outdated attitudes. It took having Mihan to open my eyes, to see not a disabled person, but instead a person for whom disability is one amongst many facets of their persona. I'd like to think that Mihan's classmates learnt this lesson far earlier than me and would use Down syndrome as just one of many adjectives to describe him and see a boy who is essentially more like them than different. They are his biggest cheerleaders and teachers. They make no conscious efforts to include him. He's just one of their gang. And I'm sure that they'll very naturally contribute to a more inclusive world. Mihan wants to be many things: a chef, a YouTuber, an author. I have no doubt that he'll achieve his dreams. Being an articulate and confident young man, he'll also be a great advocate for disability rights. Perhaps one day he'll be here giving a BIS talk and really challenge the preconceived notions that people hold about individuals with special needs.